Aunt Polya. Aunt Polya died in the hospital of stomach cancer at the age of 52. The autopsy confirmed the attending physician's diagnosis. However, in our hospital, the pathological diagnosis rarely diverged from the clinical one. That happens in the best and the worst hospitals. Aunt Polya's last name was known only in the camp office. Even the boss's wife, for whom Aunt Polya had been a dnivalnaya, something like duty orderly, or rather a servant, for 7 years, couldn't remember her real name. Everyone here knows what a dnivalny is, but not everyone knows what that person might be. A confident person of the inaccessible ruler of thousands of human destinies. A witness to his weaknesses, his dark sides. A person who knows all the shadow sides of the home. A slave but also an indispensable participant in the underground apartment warfare. A participant or at least an observer of domestic battles. An unknown arbiter in quarrels between husband and wife. A manager of the boss's family increasing his wealth. And not only through thrift and honesty. One such dnivalny sold tobacco cigarettes for the boss' advantage, selling them to prisoners for 10 rubles a cigarette. The camp chamber awaits and measures established that a matchbox contains enough tobacco for 8 cigarettes, and 1/8 of tobacco pack consists of 8 such matchboxes. These bulk solid standards are valid across 1/8 of the Soviet Union, all of Eastern Siberia. Our dnivalny earned 640 rubles for each pack of makorka, but even this sum wasn't, as they say, the limit. You could put smaller weight of tobacco in boxes. The difference was barely noticeable, and no one wanted to quarrel with the boss dnivalny. You could roll thinner cigarettes. The whole rolling was the work of the dnivalny's hands and conscience. Our dnivalny bought makorka from the boss for 500 rubles a pack. The 140 ruble difference went into the dnivalny's pocket. Aunt Polya's boss didn't sell tobacco, and Aunt Polya never had to deal with any shady dealings under his control. Aunt Polya was a master cook, and dnivalny skilled in the culinary arts were especially valuable. Aunt Polya could and did offer easy work for any of her fellow Ukrainians, or include them in some list of released work. Aunt Polya's assistance to her fellow countrymen was quite significant. She didn't help others, except maybe with advice. Aunt Polya had been working for the boss for almost 7 years, thought she would spend comfortably through her 3 years of her remaining term. Aunt Polya was a provident, disinterested and material advantaged woman, and rightly believed that her indifference to gifts and money would surely please any boss. Her calculations proved correct. She was an insider in the boss family, and a plan for her release had already been hatched. She was to be listed as a truck loader at the mine where the boss brother worked, and the mine would send a petition for her release. But Aunt Polya fell sick, her condition got worse, and she was taken to the hospital. The head doctor ordered a private room for Aunt Polya. 10 half corpses were dragged out into the cold corridor to make room for the boss's dnivalny. The hospital came alive. Every afternoon, trucks and jeeps wheelers arrived. Ladies in sheepskin coats emerged from the cabs. Militaries came. All were eager to see Aunt Polya, and Aunt Polya promised everyone that if she recovered, she would put in a good word for them to the boss. Every Sunday, a ZIS 110 limousine would pull into the hospital gates. A package and note from the boss wife would be delivered to Aunt Polya. Aunt Polya would give everything to the nurses. Try a spoonful and then give all the rest to them. She knew her disease, but Aunt Polya couldn't recover. Then one day, an unusual visitor showed up at the hospital with a note from the hospital superintendent, Father Peter, as he identified himself to the hospital director. It turned out that Aunt Polya wanted to confess. That unusual visitor was Petka Abramov. Everyone knew him. He'd even been in his hospital a few months ago, and now it was Father Peter. The reverend's visit excited the entire hospital. It turns out there are priests in our area, and they hear confessions. In the largest hospital ward number 2, where between lunch and dinner, some patient would tell a gastronomic story every day. Certainly not to whet the appetite, but out of a hungry person's need to stimulate the senses of food. In that room, all they talked about was Aunt Polya's confession. Father Peter wore a cap and a peacoat. His quilted trousers were tucked into old tarpaulin boots. His hair was cut short, much shorter for a priest than the hair of the 1950s hipsters. Father Peter Peter unbuttoned his peacoat and telegreka, revealing a light Kasavarodka shirt and a large pectoral cross. It wasn't a simple wooden cross, but a crucifix, homemade, carved by a skilled hand, but without the necessary tools. Aunt Polya confessed to Father Peter and he left. He stood for a long time on the highway, raising his hands as trucks approached. 2 cars passed without stopping. Then Father Peter pulled a new rolled cigarette from his shirt, raised it above his head, and the first car slowed down to a stop. The driver hospitably opened the door. Aunt Polya died and was buried in the hospital cemetery. It was a large cemetery beneath the mountain. Instead of to die, the patient said to get put under the Sopka hill, with mass graves labeled A, B, C, and D, looking like several cord-shaped lines of individual graves. Neither the boss, nor his wife, nor Father Piotr Peter attended Aunt Polya's funeral. The burial ceremony was the usual one. The foreman tied a wooden tag with a number to Aunt Polya's left shin. That was her personal prisoner case file number. According to instructions, the number should be written in black pencil, not indelible chemical pencil, as they do on the forest topographical markers. The familiar to such works, gravediggers and orderlies pelted Aunt Polya's withered body with stones. The foreman anchored the stick in the stones, again with the same personal case file number. Several days passed and Father Peter showed up at the hospital. He'd already been to the cemetery and now was thundering through the office. Need to put up a cross. A cross? What else? No way, the duty orderly replied. They argued for a long time. Finally, Father Peter announced, I'm giving you a week. If the cross isn't erected within that week, I complain about you to the head of the department. If he doesn't help, I write to the head of Dalstroy. If he refuses, I complain to the Council of People's Commissars. If the Council of People's Commissars refuses, I write to the Senate, yelled Father Peter. The orderly was an old prisoner and knew the Wonderland well. He knew the most unexpected things could happen there. And after some thought, he decided to report the whole story to the head doctor. The head doctor, who had once been either a minister or a deputy minister, advised the orderly not to argue and put a cross on Aunt Polya's grave. If the priest speaks with such confidence, then there's something here. He knows something. Anything is possible. Anything, the former minister muttered. They erected a cross, the first cross in the cemetery. It was visible from far away, and although it was the only one, the whole place took on a truly cemetery-like appearance. All the walking sick came to look at that cross, and a small sign was nailed to it with an inscription in a mourning frame. The task of creating the inscription was entrusted to an elderly artist who had been hospitalized for almost 2 years. He wasn't actually hospitalized, merely listed as being in his bed, and spent all his time mass-producing 3 types of copies: Golden Autumn, 3 Bogatyrs, and the Death of Ivan the Terrible. The artist swore he could paint these copies with his eyes closed. His clients included the entire village administration and hospital's administration too. But the artist agreed to make a sign for Aunt Polya's cross. He asked what is wanted to be written. The foreman searched through his lists. I can't find anything except initials, he said. Timoshenko P.I. Right. Polina Ivanovna died on such and such a date. The artist, never trying to argue with his clients, wrote it down. Exactly a week later, Petka Abramov, or Father Piotr Peter, showed up. He said Aunt Polya's name was not Polina, but Praskovia, and not Ivanovna, but Ilinichna. He gave her date of birth and demanded that it be added to the grave cross inscription. The inscription was corrected in the presence of Father Peter.